But now we want to turn the page to another very important story, one that unfortunately is not making a lot of international news, and that is the story in Swaziland of the struggle there for democracy against the monarch, King Maswati. And we are very happy to be joined, honored, I should say, by Pius Vilagati, who's the international secretary of the Communist Party of Swaziland that's been right on the front lines of all these struggles. Pius, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor.
Well, I'll tell you, the honor is all ours. And maybe before we get into some of the specific issues, I think there are probably many people watching who haven't heard a lot about what's going on in Swaziland, what the nature of the struggle is. I know it's been about a year since, a real major sort of wave of uprisings have started. But maybe just to give some context about the country and why folks feel the need to rise up in such numbers with such steadfastness.
Well, firstly, the fact of the matter is that Swaziland remains the last absolute monarchy in Africa. It is one of the last absolute monarchies in the world. So that in itself has meant that a large chunk of the economy, year in, year out, goes to the monarchy, goes to the royal family. And the royal family lives a luxurious lifestyle, while about 70% of the people live below the poverty line. People are impoverished in the midst of many luxurious Rolls-Royce vehicles, luxurious Mercedes-Benz, and luxurious BMWs that are used by the monarchy. People do not even have the basic needs for them to survive each day. And therefore, this has been deepening. In 2019, the King Mswati III, he bought about 19 Rolls-Royce vehicles for himself, for his 15 wives and his children, and for his mother, who is the queen in Swaziland. So people have been seeing these things happening year in, year out, where the royal family is able to amass a great deal of wealth. Wealth, which, by the way, belongs to the people of Swaziland. And the people are saying, it is not right that you use our wealth for your personal and your family enrichment while we remain poor. As things stand, the health care system is collapsed. People cannot access even the most basic of medical drugs. They cannot get treatment because the budget goes to the royal and only small little crumbs go to the people. So the people decided that in 2021 enough is enough. But this was not the first time, of course, that the people wanted to do away with the system. It's been a system that has been going on from 12 April 1973, which was imposed by the late Sopuza II, who is the father of the current king. Now, things have been deteriorating from then and until now, when people started to say enough is enough with the entire monarchy system in itself. And those are basically the things or the basic realities which led to the uprising in 2021.
Can you tell us a bit about what the response has been to that, to the mass demonstrations, and maybe a little bit about some of the risks that come along with pushing back? Like, what do people like you have to deal with in terms of this absolute monarchy when you stand up and challenge it?
Well, although it has the Constitution of 2000, it's still according to the 1973 King's Proclamation, where political parties remain banned and political activity remains banned. To differ with the ruling elite is a crime in Swaziland. It doesn't matter if you belong to a political party or not, or if you are a member of a union. You are guilty by raising political demands in Swaziland. And this has meant that the security forces are able to arrest anyone they suspect as a leader of either a community or an organization, including a union, and arrest them on trumped up charges. Sometimes they arrest and keep you in jail for an indefinite time. And the violence that has been meted on the people. For instance, last year we had over 70 people getting shot and killed by the army and the police. And I must state that last year, of course, it was the first time that the regime unleashed the army on the people. And since then, the army has not been called back to barracks. So, standing up against the regime gets you killed, gets you arrested, gets you tortured, gets you victimized by different institutions of Swaziland. It could be your college, your university administration. It could be the chief in the rural areas. Remember, Swaziland is about 70 to 77% rural. So a great chunk of the people live in the rural areas where the rule of chiefs is supreme. And the chiefs in the communities, they they rule or administrate the communities on behalf of the monarchy. So the monarchy is literally a feudal lord. If you were to speak about the feudal lords in Europe, you'd have to go back centuries. That's where we are at in Swaziland.
Well, I really appreciate that. And, one thing that it just brings to mind is, regionally, internationally, who is backing the king? I mean, I know that, in 2021, the protest at one point became so large and so intense that the king fled the country. And I just feel, for him to be the last absolute monarch, to be putting this brutal repression, on those who are standing up, that he must be useful to somebody somewhere in the sort of broader imperialist world. And so I'm curious, both sort of in the continent and internationally, where is the king drawing his strength from, where he feels he can so wantonly, act this way?
To understand these current circumstances, it is important that we go back to history. The current monarchy is, for all practical purposes, a creation of British colonialism. When the British left Swaziland in 1968, and thus Swaziland gained independence, they, they left the current ruling royal family, and they left all the minerals, the natural minerals, to him. And therefore, from there, the relationship between the Swazi regime and British government still continues. And in addition to that, the role of apartheid South Africa is important to understand the current system. System which advised the late King Sobhuza II in the 1960s to ensure that when independence comes, he has power. And although the elections in 1967, the parliamentary elections, were under a constitution which allowed multi-party participation, the king's political party won all the seats with the backing of apartheid regime. And apartheid's interest at that time was to crush the liberation movement of South Africa, which had exiles in Swaziland and other countries. And that is why they supported the royal family, because they knew that the king was going to support apartheid, even though he was giving the image of supporting the South African liberation movement. But 5 years after that, out of 24 seats in parliament, the King's party lost 3 seats to the opposition. The opposition, which was the Ngwane National Liberation Movement, was the one which had made it clear that it was going to support the South African liberation struggle. In that instance, the apartheid regime advised again the ruling monarch to abolish political parties so that he maintains his supreme power. So he had that support from outside. So this is why the system, some people misunderstand it as a truly African system. It is not an African system. It is an imposed system created by colonialism and apartheid. And with the entrenchment of the absolute monarchy system, other players also came into the picture. When Swaziland gained independence in 1968, they continued to be, they became friends or allies with Israel and also with Taiwan, who remain the regime's supporters even today, militarily, economically, and otherwise. And again, the USA is also another supporter of the regime in Swaziland. And the approach of the USA, besides the companies that they've placed in Swaziland for investment to assist Swaziland with its economy, it is also interventions in places where aspects where the royal family has destroyed the economy. For instance, in the education system and the healthcare system, this is where the USA comes in and gives this foreign aid to them. And of course, the European Union is also another player in Swaziland, particularly in the sugar industry. And they help to build infrastructure for Swaziland in order to give the impression that Swaziland is at least developing, when we know for a fact that it is the EU helping the regime to remain afloat. Because if you were to remove all these support systems, this regime would fall the next hour. Forget about the next day. The next hour it will fall. So with the movement last year and still continuing, the support, as I've mentioned, the chiefs before, the support from the chiefs in the rural communities. For a long time, they helped to sustain the monarchy because they were able to control the rural community from uprising. But in 2021, the struggles spread for the first time in the history of our struggles in Swaziland, spread to the rural communities. And now that is when the last point which the king had, and he was forced now to release the army. So what he has now is the last resort, which is the army. And if the army is destroyed or is defeated, then the system is going to fall.
Let me just ask you this quickly as a final question. So where are things now? What is the state of the movement? What do those of you on the ground have planned to keep things moving forward?
What's been happening right now is that particularly the youth, which is the one that has been really in the forefront of the struggle, and that movement has been growing, particularly the youth movement. The Communist Party of Swaziland held its summer school last year in December, our annual summer school. And we continue to say that we need the communist youth to the front to lead these struggles because Swaziland is amongst the youngest populations in Swaziland. And as such, any revolution that's going to take place is going to be led by the youth. For it to be successful, it necessarily needs the youth to be at the forefront. And so because we are responding to real material conditions that are happening in our society,